Okay, here we are today on a lovely tributary of the Chattahoochee River in Georgia. We're looking for Chattahoochee bass today, one of the rarest species of red-eye bass in the country, and that would mean the world. Like most tributaries of the Chattahoochee, this one has non-native bass in it. The non-native bass here is a quote-unquote spotted bass, which is actually genetically a mix of Alabama bass and spotted bass. They seem to have hybridized and or outcompeted the Chattahoochee bass in this stretch of the river, but there's a waterfall up here. Once you get above that, spotted bass appear to be gone. Never caught one up there, and the fish you do catch are pure Chattahoochee bass. Chattahoochee bass have the misfortune of having their native range encompass much of the metro Atlanta area, one of the, if not the largest urban centers in the southeastern United States. So it definitely did a lot of damage to them long before we ever knew that Chattahoochee bass existed. And then subsequent to all the urbanization and effects of cotton farming in the 1800s and all that, we have these non-native bass in here now, and they are making it very tough. Georgia DNR has done a lot of survey work in the Chattahoochee Basin, very meticulously, from the headwaters all the way down to the edge of the fall line near Columbus, Georgia. And they have found only a handful of populations where all the fish are pure, less than 6. There's another few that are mostly pure, but I mean, that's rather alarming. The fish used to probably be found in the upper third of the basin, and now it's reduced to maybe 20 populations total, and of them only a quarter of them are probably pure, where all the fish are pure. So they're a major conservation concern for sure, and we'll talk more about that as the day goes on. Yep, first fish of the day here is the aforementioned spotted bass in this stream, which is a mix of spotted bass and Alabama bass. This fish was caught again in that stretch below the waterfall. You can see it pretty much looks like a spotted bass. If you counted out the scales, it could be an intermediate scenario between the two species, but generally in your hand it's not easy to tell those two species apart, and when they hybridize it's really difficult. This is a typical Chattahoochee Basin quote-unquote spotted bass. It's an invasive here and has interbred with both shoal bass and Chattahoochee bass and eliminated a lot of them throughout the basin. Here's the second fish, another one of these spotted bass hybrids. Now this one is a lot more chunky, like a punctulatus, an actual spotted bass would be for a fish this size. So if I had to guess, this fish might have a higher percentage of the actual spotted bass genes in it than the Alabama bass, or it could just be a different body shape. Just fish are individual. We talk a lot about tooth patches. The tooth patch is on the tongue, and it's that discolored oval shaped patch that you see there in the middle of the tongue. So you can actually visually see them as well as feel them. If you rub your finger over that, that will be very rough, and that is the tooth patch that distinguishes a spotted bass from fish like smallmouth bass, who have a tooth patch but it's much smaller and often you never even notice it, or shoal bass that have none, or largemouth bass that have none. Red-eye bass, some species do have them and some species don't, so it's not the best characteristic there, but that is what the tooth patch looks like. For those of you who have wondered that, especially if you're not used to catching these fish, that is exactly what it looks like right there in the middle of that tongue. But this is a dominant bass species now in the Chattahoochee Basin, and it has driven out an awful lot of the native shoal bass and Chattahoochee bass that used to live in these streams. Sad, but that's just the 21st century reality that we all have to live with. So here's another one. Notice this one's not nearly as fat as the last one that I had. Check out the anal fin on this fish. It's very colored up. It's reminiscent of a red-eye bass. Now this fish has no other characters of red-eye bass. There's no eye crescent there. There's no tips, white tips on the tail. And honestly, Chattahoochee bass are pretty distinctive in that their fins are red, and hopefully we're going to see one later today. So when they hybridize with things, that red color tends to come right along with it, maybe not quite as bright. So this is probably just still a spotted bass. So here we are at the waterfall I mentioned on this Chattahoochee tributary. I hesitated to video this because some of you, maybe a lot of you actually might know where this is. And if you do, I would strongly suggest you keep it to yourself. And this is an area that is pretty fragile, and the less people come here probably the better, given the fact that it is one of the few places that has pure Chattahoochee bass left. This is just one of those little geologic anomalies that just pop up on these streams. You know, there's been a lot of rock that I've climbed and waded across and all, but all of a sudden here you just get this incredible boulder jumble that goes across the stream. These really huge rocks that you can't quite see because it's covered with vegetation. But this is where the adventure part of fishing for these fish comes in, because we're going to have to go over that in order to get to the area above the waterfall where the pure fish tend to be. Beautiful area of the world. And there's a lot of places like this in the Chattahoochee Basin. They tend to be more up above Lake Lanier than down where we are today. But yes, this is what red-eye bass fishing is all about. It's an adventure as well as fishing, all at the same time. Rock climbing, it's bushwhacking, it's wading, it's climbing, all of that wrapped up into one thing. So yeah, going over this thing is not for the faint of heart, especially with felt bottom boots. It's definitely something you got to be careful about, because you can get hurt. And while you're certainly not in the middle of nowhere here, you are definitely not close, and people might not come up here to see where the heck you are for a while. Let's see if I can do this. All right. Not normally carrying a camera in one hand when I pull this off, but at any rate, it gives you some idea of kind of adventures you can get into fishing for red-eye bass in Georgia and Alabama. And in South Carolina, where you're actually in the mountains, in the upper part of the Chattahoochee, boy, some of those access points and streams are quite exciting. Let's just put it that way. But here we are on the upper side of that waterfall, and we'll see if we can run ourselves into a couple pure Chattahoochee bass before the end of the day. But what a beautiful place. What a beautiful place to go fishing for bass. Again, this looks like a trout stream in the Appalachian Mountains, and we're not in the Appalachian Mountains, and there are no trout here. There he is. Chattahoochee bass. Micropterus chattahoochae. So, like I was saying earlier, I mean, you can't miss the fins. They are as red as an apple. You see obviously you see the eye crescent there, very noticeable. You can sort of see white tips on the fins along with the red. But yeah, red eye, there's no lateral stripe on this fish whatsoever. So this is obviously a red eye, and with those red fins, it can only be a Chattahoochee bass. The small fish are just as pretty. Look at that brilliant red on the anal fin and on the tail, and you can see that edge right there on the top too. These are, in my opinion, probably the prettiest of the red-eye bass. They're certainly the most striking. I mean, I might say Bartram's bass are actually prettier just because of the incredible blotching pattern that they have. But man, these fish with these bright red fins, you're not used to seeing a bass with bright red fins, you know, and a bluish face. In the spawning period, these things get a lot more blue and even more red, if you can imagine that. But yeah, this little guy here, he is colored up for sure. He is trying out his colors. And I say little guy, and I mean, the truth is, these fish do not grow very fast. This fish is at least finishing up its second year, and I could even buy it being finishing up its third year, or third summer anyway. Like other species of red eye, when you get this thing underwater, the colors really pop.
Look at the bright red. You can see it so much better now.
Here's the third one for the day, at least the third one that I've landed. You can see again that really bright red, just so obvious on these fish. They're such a pretty animal. Such a pretty red-eye bass. They sure are. Try this underwater again, see what it looks like. Yeah, the glare is always a problem doing this. That seems like a good angle. You can see it there. Try going underwater. There's another one of these guys, another really brightly colored one. Chattahoochee bass appear to be one of the smallest, if not the smallest, of the red eyes. You know, you rarely catch fish over 10 inches. If you do, they're probably hybrids. Most of the fish are like this size, maybe, you know, to 8, 9 inches. A 10-incher is a monster. We don't really have a lot of growth information on any of these red-eye bass, mainly because they live in these small streams where we can't really collect very many of them to age without seriously impacting the population. But just based on size of what we catch when we're fishing, and honestly right now, the status of stream bass and science knowledge of stream bass, angling is probably our best bet. We can't really sample these guys very easily at all. They're in rivers that are just a little too deep for backpack shocking and way too small for a boat. Oh, here's a really pretty one. Super bright fins on this guy. Yeah, really, really pretty. Pretty little guy. One last thing has to be said. Like basically almost every red-eye bass creek, everything here is privately owned. And we are here at the leave of the property owners. This is a responsibility that we all have, is being good stewards of that privilege. Not all property owners will allow people to come on their land and fish, and if that's the case, then you don't fish. There are other places to fish. I might bring that up because here, this hole behind me, this is a really popular swimming area apparently. I mean, it's a pretty good hike from the road, not down a very easy path, but still people come up here and they have trashed the place. It's unbelievable how many bottles and cans and all that stuff. And the owner has told me that, you know, that they'd see them dragging coolers up here, which is crazy. I mean, it's hard enough for me to drag myself in a fanny pack up here. Obviously, when stuff like that happens, the landowner has to do something. They can't just let people come on their land and trash it. And they're not often going to discriminate between people with coolers and beer bottles and just people who want to catch a fish or two. When we have situations like that, it's incumbent upon us as good stewards and just all around decent humans to follow their wishes and not argue with them like has happened out here. I actually ran into the landowner last year. She was confronting people on a regular basis and including people here fishing. And the people fishing were giving her a lot of lip about, you know, that they have a right to be here. Now, where in the world they're getting that, I don't know. And I bring all that up to say, remember that we are here by the leave, let, and benevolence of landowners. If you're shoal bass fishing, you're usually on a creek or river large enough that your landowners aren't really an issue. But creeks here like this one, which is where you fish for red eyes, you're on their land, and if they don't want you here, that's their right. You certainly don't want to argue with them. What you do want to do is find out who owns the land, especially if it's posted. Find out who owns the land and have a normal adult conversation with them. And you know what? Often you will get permission to be on the land. But what you don't want to do is argue with them and pull false facts and fake news out of thin air to try to support your otherwise untenable situation. Now, it is true here in Georgia that there's been some efforts to try to limit landowner control of larger rivers that would be called navigable, and that is an ongoing debate right now. But there is no debate for streams of this size. This is private. The people who own the banks own the river. If it's a different person on each side, then they own to the middle of the river. And if you're in a situation like that, it would be possible to get permission from one of the two landowners and stay on their side when you're going up. Of course, you can't always do that in creeks like this, because sometimes these the one bank all of a sudden becomes sheer cliffs. So it's far better to get permission from both if that's the case. But what you don't want to do is be out here illegally, you know, and if you are confronted by the landowner, that is not the time to be arguing and talking about rights or any kind of legislation that may or may not apply here. That is your time to tuck your tail under, put your hat in your hand, apologize, and leave. We don't want to be part of the problem. There's already plenty of problems here with people accessing an area like that to go swimming and partying in, which is a much different crowd, as you would imagine, as someone out here fly fishing for red-eyed bass. But we are all colored by the same pen, so to speak. So they have a right to keep all of us off if that's what they want. And it's up to us to be adults, since there are a few others using these creeks that seem to be adults. At any rate, it's worthwhile to remember that we are here by their leave, and we don't have rights to be here just because we have a fishing license. Be smart, be courteous, and be a better person. And it will help all of us out in the long run.